I'm going to ask a question and admit my own newness to the urgency and depth and importance of this topic. I've known about it for a long time, as probably most Americans at this level, and I've learned a lot in preparing for this panel with these fantastic panelists. But I want to figure out who's in the room. Are you sitting in my chair, or are you sitting in their chair? So who's a practitioner, really knows this issue, fighting for it on the front lines in this room? And then I want to find out who's coming to learn more today. Wow, okay. That's yeah. Well, that's great. So we're going to do a lot of sharing, learning, explaining. And I think what I'm really struck by is the numbers, when you really dig into them, are scary, urgent, and compelling. The cycle looks very challenging to break, and we know we've got to engage the business sector if we're going to get there. And so we're going to talk about all those things today and what it will take for us to get traction in this area, what we can learn from other issues that have gotten traction, have engaged the business sector, have engaged consumers, and then how we link this to other issues, because as we know, in today's modern world, working in a silo really isn't the best way to approach any issue. I'm Kathy Calvin. I'm the President and CEO of the United Nations Foundation, so I should have introduced myself to start with. We actually work with a lot of UN agencies, and I want to just recommend a report that the UN ODC published this year, which is kind of the gold standard on human trafficking, and I've got a copy here if somebody wants to carry one home, or we can certainly make them available to others. And we're proud to work with the UN and help others work with the UN. We try to build public-private partnerships. We do a lot of advocacy for the UN in the United States and around the world. And this is obviously an issue that the UN takes very seriously and incorporates into a lot of its work, whether it's working with women, girls, empowerment, labor, or whatever. So we have 4 great panelists today, and our first panelist actually came with audio visuals so that we can begin our learning right away. Like me, he works for an organization that was founded by Ted Turner.
Right.
So
there you go.
Ted Turner founded the UN Foundation, and he also founded, of course, CNN. And LEIF COORLIM is the executive editor of the CNN Freedom Project. He's an award-winning journalist. I have a feeling some of you may know him because of some of the other great series that he has done over the years. He did Eco Solutions and Going Green. He's also the head of CNN International's Impact Your World segment. And he's won awards for all these things because these are the kind of programs CNN should be doing more of. Right. And when they do, they certainly do win awards. And so he has overseen and led and championed the creation of programming, of hundreds of programs on anti-slavery stories and issues. And so we'll let him tell his story and introduce the video, which will give us all a good grounding. LEIF?
Okay. Thank you. I feel like we should, give a cheer to Ted Turner.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is LEIF COORLIM. I'm the executive editor of the Freedom Project, which is something that is kind of unique in the field of network media. It's a initiative, groundbreaking initiative that exists for the sole purpose of helping people, organizations, victims, champions of victims that are engaged in the fight against modern-day slavery and human trafficking. And it was really born about because of 2 issues, or 2 situations. One was a documentary I did in Cambodia in 2010 about child sex prostitution, and the fact that it was right there out in the open. It was even on TripAdvisor. You could type in the name of a certain hotel. In this case, it was the Paris Hotel in Phnom Penh, and it would talk openly about the fact that there was a fishbowl brothel where you could find young girls. They didn't expressly say that it was 12-year-olds like the girl that we found, but there was allusions to it, and that really shocked a lot of people. I think anybody who sees that, especially if you're there and witnessing it, and you're not there for that purpose, it's really shocking to see that this goes on. And when you look at the facts and the figures and the figures like the International Labor Organization uses, or some of the independent scholars and researchers on the topic, and you see that's 20 million or 30 million people around the world, and it's in every country. That's something that is just unacceptable, and it is shameful. Actually, is in terms of a global society that this is allowed to go on like that. So that's what we felt at CNN, that this was a topic that wasn't being discussed enough, and people weren't really aware of it, and so we just decided to do something about it, and that's how the Freedom Project was born. It was just an effort to tell as many stories as we can. It was supposed to only be a year, but the reaction that we got from the viewers and the impact that we saw on the ground was so overwhelming that I think we just decided to go for it. And so we're in our 4th year. We've done over 400 stories, 24 documentaries. The Freedom Project has led to laws being changed, everywhere from Cambodia to California. We've assisted in life-saving surgeries for victims that we've uncovered who are in absolutely dire predicaments. We've helped, our stories have led to more than 1,000 people being rescued, which is always tough to tell because you tell the story and then, something happens, but you don't necessarily know if it's, a result of your work, but the coincidence is there. So it's been very gratifying, obviously. CNN is very proud of it. Personally, I feel very good about it. And the video, I'm supposed to toss to the video. The video is really about just putting, and I think this is the best thing that CNN has done for the issue, is really just put a human face on this topic. I mean, we're talking about supply chains in multinational organizations, companies, corporations, and it can, you can get mired in the details and how the structure works. And I think when you see the people that we're talking about and the issues that they face and their daily lives, that like we did a story in the chocolate industry, and the vast majority of people who are toiling 16, 18 hours a day, exposed to chemicals without any protective gear, have scars up and down their arms and legs from machete hacks. They've never even tasted chocolate. They don't even know what the cocoa beans are used for. And so that was one of the things that I think really illuminates the issue, is that these people, and some of the kids, some of the people there were 8 years old, 9 years old, not going to school. Some of them were 75 years old, 80 years old. They've been doing it all their lives. Nobody had ever tasted chocolate. They didn't even know what the cocoa beans were used for. So the film, I think, highlights the issue, and it frames the issue that everybody's going to talk about. And my fellow panelists are much more engaged, and they're much more informed than I am on this issue. But I think it helps serve as an entree into what they're talking about. So we have the video.
That's great. Consumers don't often stop to think what went into the making of the clothing that they're wearing or the good that they have purchased.
Branded like her master's cattle, a book shows us the scars that will forever identify her as a former slave.
An army of brickmakers. These laborers take home no wage. They are working off a debt.
They describe how the crew who didn't work hard enough had their throats punctured with a blade.
I was an easy target.
Today, Flor Molina is on a mission. A decade ago in Mexico, she found herself in desperate circumstances and ended up becoming a victim of human trafficking.
I was working 2 jobs, cleaning houses and cooking in a restaurant.
A woman approached with an offer, she says, too good to pass up, a job in the United States. But Flor found herself in a Los Angeles sweatshop, sewing and working 17 hours a day, forced to live in the factory, she says, not allowed to speak to anyone.
This is fertile recruiting ground for unscrupulous recruitment agents who promise the earth to people who have almost nothing. It's exactly what happened to these 4 women. They tell me their employment at an electronics factory in Malaysia turned into a nightmare. They say their passport was confiscated. They work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, receiving only $100 a month after deductions.
Tim Rossner is a geographer, not exactly what you'd call an activist. His outrage over a CNN news story compelled him to do something he'd never done before, to take on a corporation.
There's power in numbers.
Rossner turned to the activist platform Change.org, where he launched an online petition demanding that Wyndham reform its policies. Within a few weeks, 14,000 people had signed on.
School. This is a rehabilitation home for former child slaves. Girls and boys just like 13-year-old Kusum. Kusum says she was sold to brokers for the equivalent of a mere $14 and forced to work in Nepal's carpet factories every day from 3 a.m. till 7 p.m., with very few breaks in between. They told me if I didn't work hard enough on the looms, they would shock me with electric current. And they tried to. We took hidden cameras into one of the countless factories as we looked for carpets in the back alleys of Kathmandu. Though we couldn't tell their exact ages, some of these children appeared to be under 10. But there are factories in Nepal that don't employ child labor. This inspector works for GoodWeave, an organization working to ensure that handmade carpets that carry their label are not made with child labor.
On this farm, we find Abdul. He's survived 3 years of work. He's just 10. He earns no wages for his work, he says, just food, the occasional tip from the owner, and the torn clothes on his back.
Apologies for the editing. But that's, those are, 7, 8 stories out of 400 that we've told. And just watching it, there's so much in just those stories as well that we weren't able to talk about. For example, the story in Cambodia with Dan Rivers, our correspondent. We talked about the 4 women who were forced to work in it was an illegal recruiter who had gone in and into the village and offered, promises of, high wages and short contracts. You work 9 months, make, something like $20,000, which isn't a lot to, us in the Western world, but in that situation when finding your next meal is the major priority. It's something that you can't pass up. But what happened was we told the story of the 4 women and we heard from them, but there was actually another 16-year-old girl who hadn't come back. And so that conversation that Dan had in the village began the actual investigation. That's the starting point for the story. And we went, I wasn't there, but Dan went and found the girl, contacted, the factory owners, got her out, negotiated for her release, and it wasn't a negotiation. It was like, what are you doing? You have her passport, you're not paying her, let her out. And it turned out that factory was supplying electronics for Western Digital, one of the biggest electronics manufacturers in the world. And they were understandably outraged as well. And it wasn't a situation where we came on air, excuse me, and just, said Western Digital's the devil. This is, this is one of the worst corporations in the world. You should boycott all their goods. You should never buy a hard drive from them again. What we did was say, you have a problem. You probably should have done something about this already, but you haven't. We are here. We are watching you. And what are you going to do about this? And they enacted laws. The Cambodian government increased their monitoring of the of work visas, specifically to other Southeast Asian countries. They took note. Western Digital, they ended their contract with that factory. The chocolate industry, I think, also is one of the best examples and my most favorite, because this is something I had a hand in. But I don't know how much people follow this, but about 10 years ago, this problem, the problem that we cited with the story of Abdul, made big news in the United States. There was an ABC documentary that really highlighted how big a problem this was and how many children were working in these cocoa plantations. And all of the chocolate companies got together. They were being pressured by the U.S. government. It was a bilateral effort, bipartisan effort. And they got together, they signed something called the Cocoa Protocol, and it was the top 10 manufacturers and producers of cocoa said that they were going to enact these 6 changes. They were going to make 6 strong changes that would eradicate the worst forms of child labor in their supply chains. It was lauded. All the U.S. Media outlets covered it, and it was this idea that a industry full of competitors could come together on this central issue and make changes. Well, nothing happened. They got the press, and then everybody moved on. The news cycle went a different direction, and they never followed through on any of those promises. So, just so happened that the Freedom Project launched on the 10th anniversary of the protocol. So obviously it was a natural fit. Time-wise, we started our campaign with that. Our business correspondent Richard Quest did a week-long series looking at the issue and why things hadn't been enacted. And the one thing that I saw in the Cocoa Protocol that I thought could be a nice entry point was this issue of independent third-party verification. If we could just get the companies to agree, if they say they don't have a problem anymore and they're not doing anything about it, if we can just bring somebody in to talk about, to see whether or not there's a problem and engage in a dialogue, then that might be the starting point. And we did a documentary, reached out to all 10 retailers and producers. Nobody responded. We did our thing again, not blaming anybody, but just saying this is a problem. Who's working to solve it? Nothing happened. But 2 weeks later, Hershey's gave $10 million to build new schools and engage. And again, you don't know if that's a coincidence or not. But then they also signed up with, I think it was Rainforest Alliance, to allow independent third-party verification. So that was a kind of a sign like, okay, maybe we're doing something. So we did it again, another week of coverage, specifically looking at chocolate. And Ferrero, after that, nobody talked to us again. But Ferrero signed up 3 weeks later with an organization called UTS, which is, does the same work as Rainforest Alliance. And then we had several others, M&M, Mars, and others. So we knew we were doing something right.
That's great.
And the last time we did a story, the last story we did was Chocolate's Child Slaves. And afterwards, the EVP of Nestle Global called me up and he said, all right, enough. We know we have a problem, let's do something about it. So the EVP actually took Richard Quest to the Ivory Coast for a week and it laid out everything. We had full access, he showed us, they took us to where the kids were working. And it was all about creating a candid space for them to have a conversation. And then, they promised to make some changes, so we'll see.
Well, it's powerful what can be done with persistent spotlights put on things. And so congratulations on all you're doing, and keep up the good work. And you highlighted our next speaker, which is terrific. Nina Smith is from GoodWeave, and you saw what GoodWeave is doing with the carpet industry in the film. And you've been a long time, and some would say tireless advocate for children's rights and fighting slavery through your career. And while she's now the executive director of GoodWeave, she was previously the leader of the Craft Center and the president of the Fair Trade Federation. And she's also a Skoll Award winner. And so your work has been recognized, and you've been at this for a long time. So I know it'd be helpful to hear from you what you think the challenges are and where some of the opportunities are moving forward.
Great. Well, I'll say just a little bit about our work. And LEIF touched on the fact that there are that the slavery issue is there are a lot of children caught up in this problem, and estimates are about 8 million children. So that's about more than a quarter of all the estimated slavery in the world, and 168 million children working in the global economy somewhere. It's vast, and one could argue that's slavery also. So this is a huge problem. Our organization started in the mid-90s to highlight an industry, the handmade carpet industry, where this problem is significant. We focused on carpets because there was a well-documented problem there, and we wanted to look at how we could work through an export market to change the problem. So I'll tell you a little bit about our work and some of the challenges briefly, but there are three main things we do. One is we work in the marketplace. This is a market-driven model. The idea was we would essentially educate consumers, engage businesses, and send a message down the supply chain that child labor won't be tolerated. We license companies into our certification, and LEIF mentioned some other certifications. Ours is specifically tailored to deal with this issue. When a company signs up to GoodWeave to get our certification label on the back of a product, that's kind of the magic moment in our work, because it takes, aside from some of the Freedom Project documentaries and stories, this issue is essentially invisible. The reason why, because people are locked up. So when you open up a supply chain, when a company says yes, it takes the problem out of obscurity and exposes it. In the case of our work, we're able to go into supply chains at all levels, and that's a really important point that we might talk about further later, that we aren't talking about factories often, subcontracted supply chains. That's where slavery happens. So we have local NGOs on the ground in India, Nepal, and Afghanistan, where we monitor at every level, from a factory to a village-based cottage industry level, right into homes. And we rescue victims. So if we identify children, especially if they've been trafficked, which many of them have, they're rescued. You saw our rescue home in Nepal, and we provide long-term support for that child in the form of psychological support and long-term education. Most of them are family reunited, and we provide support to the family and that child to break the cycle, essentially, of slavery. And finally, we have a range of prevention programs in all of these countries, primarily focused on children's education, but also awareness raising, health, and a range of other initiatives that are really tailored to those communities. So it's very holistic. I would say that a few points. One, right now, we've been around for nearly 20 years. We certify about 5% of all the carpets that are produced and traded in the world today. And that's actually, when you look at the certification world, it's a pretty high level of market saturation. And part of why we've kept this focus, laser focus on this industry, is because we want to be able to demonstrate that an entire industry can be transformed and we can completely eradicate this problem. And we estimate that to be at about 15% market saturation, and that's the trajectory we're on right now. And we're also seeking to really produce a model for how it can be done in other industries and are already starting to work in new industries, including a really exciting project in Nepal. In the brick kilns, we also saw some footage of that, and I would say brick kilns all over the world are just riddled with slavery. In Nepal, about 175,000 adults and children are working in this industry. So I think some of the biggest challenges we might begin to talk about have to do with why is it so hard to get companies to take the step and do this. But I'll stop there.
Yeah, and you might just say, why is it impossible or hard to get to consumers so that we are even aware of our choices?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's difficult. In the case of our product, it's not a product that people buy every day. So we have a awareness campaign really targeting high-end luxury consumers, interior designers, people that are kind of right the bullseye of the people who are buying this product. And we have a public service advertising campaign that's supported by major media organizations like Hearst and Dwell. We've been featured on Freedom. We do quite a bit around awareness, but you know, it's a challenge because someone might hear the message today and 5 years later they are making the purchase, and so they might be aware there's a problem. And if they ask questions, then they're up against a person on the sales floor who might be telling them a story that may not be true. So it's a challenge.
Great. Thank you, Nina. Our next speaker is Dan VIEDERMAN, and he's the executive director of Verite, which is another organization, an NGO that works with companies, suppliers, and governments worldwide to create and maintain better labor conditions. He's also a Skoll Award winner for social entrepreneurship. And he's done everything from teach children in rural China to managing NGOs, working with Catholic Relief Services and World Wildlife Fund. He now lives in Massachusetts, I think, but travels quite a bit and speaks fluent Chinese. Dan.
Challenge to deliver my remarks in Chinese.
Try.
So I think, like a lot of you, we were surprised to find a lot of slavery. And we found it when we started looking for other things. So our organization essentially consults with multinationals and their suppliers in supply chains in a whole range of different sectors. So whereas Nina's focused on top to bottom, airtight within the carpet sector, we're looking more generally to provide information and actionable steps to a number of different multinationals. So a lot of what we do is we go into workplaces around the world. And back in the late 90s and early 2000s, our social auditors were visiting factories in places as diverse as Mauritius, Madagascar, Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore, Saipan, Jordan. And in places like that, finding a very high incidence of a whole range of the things we look at. So higher incidences of sexual harassment, higher incidences of violence against workers by supervisors, excessive hours, working hours, which can mean up to like 100 hours a week working in a garment factory or an electronics facility. A whole range of different things. And we began to wonder why in those places did we see particularly high incidences of these. And the common thread in those different places is that the workers are not local domestic workers. They are foreign workers. So they're migrants. And they are isolated in their work location. And that prevents them, of course, from going to get help. It prevents them even from interacting with people who might be able to provide services. But one more thing, as we dived in a little bit more deeply, that we found out is that they've all taken on thousands of dollars of debt. And they have borrowed that money to facilitate their journey and get this job that they see as a lifeline out of poverty. They borrow that money often at 60% interest per year. Generally, it's lower than that, but it could still be 20% interest per year. So we began to put this together, and then some foundations, Humanity United, which was here yesterday, and the Rousing Trust based in London, gave us some money to look into this and begin to quantify the nature of this vulnerability. Why is it important to quantify it? Because in order for a multinational to decide that it's going to do something, it has to have some data about this. And we have to really be able to present the data in an accurate way. What we found was that, for example, well, I'll tell the story of a woman, a Filipino we met in a Taiwanese electronics assembly facility very recently. Her name is Eds. And this is the nature of the sort of the calculation that a lot of these workers make. You may sort of sit there and say, I know they're desperate, but how could they possibly not know that they're going to go get themselves into a condition of really bad situation? So the calculation she went through is as follows. The Taiwanese minimum wage is $630 US dollars a month. She was offered a job at $450 a month. So I don't know if she knew it was lower than the minimum wage, but it's still, for a rural Filipino woman, college educated, no prospects back home, it's still a pretty good monthly salary. So she borrowed $3,500 at home from a moneylender, borrowed some from her family, but mostly from a moneylender at some 30% per annum rate of interest, and decided this was worth it, right? $3,500 against $450 a month. In aggregate, I can see that there's a 10, 12, 13-month payback period, everything being equal, no other expenses coming in. Great, I can make this work. She gets, of course, to Taiwan. That's the bait part, and then the con or the switch comes when you get on site. So she gets to Taiwan, and in fact the salary is only $325 a month. So all of a sudden her calculation is down by 50%. She's paying, of that $325 a month, $190 of it in debt service. She's paying $50 for a crappy, apartment that she shares with someone else, really a hovel. She's paying a $50 monthly fee to the Taiwanese labor broker, which is required, and she is left with somewhere between $40 and $50 a month on which to live. There is no way she can save money and send it back home using that total that's left to her. She can barely even feed herself. On top of that, she is then transferred from working, or in addition to working in the cell phone factory during the day, she has to clean toilets at a new factory overnight. And of course, the key factor here is it's sort of amazing to think this woman is making $325 a month. How can she be a slave? And that's the nature of the modern day slavery. It's not the old sort of chattel slavery. This is someone who is caught up in a situation she cannot escape. She can't leave the employer because then she'll have no money to pay back the debt. If she doesn't pay back the debt, she will lose her family land. Her family will be somehow abused by the moneylenders that may be connected to organized crime back home. In Taiwan, she's reasonably well protected legally. If she were in Malaysia and she decided to leave her employment, she would immediately be considered an illegal immigrant and threatened with deportation. So this whole constellation of things happens based on a very rational calculation in the first place that gets people into a deep level of trouble. And frankly, this happens certainly deep in supply chains, but it happens at the top of supply chains. And the good news at the end of this somewhat bleak story, I guess, the good news is because it happens at the top of supply chains and because we've quantified it, it can be solved. So slavery is a horrible, widespread, exploitative condition where it manifests itself in the top surface levels of supply chains where multinationals are concerned. It can actually be solved. And the best example we have of this is the work that we've done with Apple, which recognized this as a big problem in Malaysia, Taiwan, and Singapore. With us, quantified the level of debt that they were facing, that their workers were facing in their contracted facilities, including some of the ones that LEIF mentioned. And then embarked on a multi-year process to educate their suppliers, to train their workers, and to figure out how much money needed to be reimbursed to workers against a fixed standard. So right now, that process of the last 4 years has reimbursed $17 million to a bunch of workers in Malaysia and Taiwan in particular. So, demonstration of the power of what multinationals can actually do. And to take it a step further, many more multinationals should be doing. We're now at about maybe 5 or 6 that are doing this sort of thing. And frankly, every single one of them that's buying anything from a set of geographies, many of which I mentioned, not to mention much more diffuse supply chains like fisheries, palm oil, and other agricultural products, need to come to grips with this problem. Luckily, there are models for how to solve it.
Wow. Impressive story. And there are no advocates to help the workers figure these things out, I take it, or maybe that's part of what Verite does?
I think there's, as with most of these things, right, you require interventions from a lot of different places. So the business has to put in place some accountability structure within its sphere of influence. There also have to ideally be alternatives for these workers. Aspirationally, of course, alternatives of good economy locally where they can make enough money, but even alternatives that can get them a job without exploiting them. And there is now literally sort of 1.5 labor recruiters or labor brokers that is trying to demonstrate the productivity gains and the ethical gains that can be achieved if you don't charge workers fees. But what that means, of course, is then the employer has to pay. So it's a pretty big shift. And I should hasten to add that the $17 million was not reimbursed by Apple as the multinational. It was reimbursed by essentially squeezing these middlemen, these unethical middlemen out of the system, people who had been siphoning money off for no good reason, for no productivity benefit whatsoever. So there has to be an alternative recruitment pipeline, there has to be more information available to migrants up front, there have to be feedback loops, and of course there has to be accountability at the end for the multinational and the employer.
Big changes, but can be done. Final speaker is Leslie Dock. Leslie, until last summer, had spent 6 years working with Walmart in government relations, public policy, corporate communications, philanthropy, and their overall corporate responsibility. And before that, he'd been with Edelman, which is a major PR firm. He didn't specifically work in this area, and he's here as an advisor to the Skoll Forum, but we all thought he'd be a terrific addition to the panel because he's obviously thought a lot about how companies make decisions at the highest levels to take on issues where it might be in the right thing to do, in their interests globally to take on some of these issues, and how they make those decisions and weigh the costs and benefits. So, Leslie Dock.
Thanks, Kathy. I am the accidental panelist here. And Kathy and I had started working together on the subject of this panel. And the reason I'm the accidental panelist, I think, is of interest. It's because we had difficulty finding a representative of a corporation that's actually working on this issue today to feel comfortable being here. And these were even corporations that were on the right side of this ledger amongst the short list of companies who are doing good things. And I think that's an indication of the difficulty in some ways of this issue, and in some ways the fear that even the companies on the right side of this ledger have about speaking about it publicly, and particularly maybe in front of audiences where they're not sure whether people will see the glass half full or glass half empty. So my mere presence here today is an indication of some of the difficulties in this topic, so I'll try and do my best. But you know, I think one of the things we all have to understand, and I've been engaged in many issues trying to create systemic change inside big companies, and they all require hard work, but this may require some of the hardest and longest work. It takes systemic work and long-term commitment to make these changes. It's not enough to have a policy and check the box, and it's not enough to tell your suppliers if they do this, you know, they won't work for you anymore. That just doesn't work. And so companies have to make this a priority. And in an age even where they confront so many challenges, from FCPA if you're a US company, to sustainability, to all of these other issues that confront them, not only do they have to realize this is the right thing, but it somehow has to rise to the point of, in a sense, being on some short list of theirs to put resources into. And that's where, of course, all of the panelists here today are so important, from the media to others, just to even put this on the list where it gets the resources it needs for the job to be done. So you have to make this a priority. You have to hire staff you might not have had before to pay attention to it. And you have to have a new system of working with your suppliers. None of this happens by accident. And more specifically, you first need, as my colleagues here have taught me, that you first have to understand, where is it? If you're a company like my former employer that sells hundreds of thousands of SKUs, from agriculture to television sets, none of which you make yourself, much of which you make through second and third parties, you have to really first do a lot of work to know where this is, even when you know the geographies and the sectors that matter. And as you try and become a company that sources more from small businesses and from small stakeholder farmers or from artisans, you've now multiplied this issue even further. So when you try and buy from small farms, because that's better than buying from big farms, or you want to give smaller businesses in developing markets an opportunity to sell on your global website, you've now multiplied this challenge even further. And you need to look you're not looking at the factory. You've got to look all the way back. And you're not looking at the final product. You have to look all the way back. And I don't say these at all as excuses. I just think it's important to understand kind of the work that's engaged. So then you need systems. You need to train not only your own people, but the factory workers and the factory managers. You have to understand the tells that Dan was talking about, so that you know to look for sexual harassment and some of the other areas. And you need procedures that go far beyond legal requirements, which by themselves do almost nothing in this. And that means you also need to have very kind of sophisticated and thought through compliance programs, because even when you find something, there's a question of what you do. Do you have a zero tolerance policy and immediately fire people? There's arguments for that. But many people, as you all know, will say that's the wrong thing to do, because then you've shut down a person's job. What you should do in some cases to help that factory improve. And so you have to put resources now into that. And how do you know which of those two things is the right thing to do? There are also structural issues. So I think in most companies, as you know, the way you do ethical sourcing is you send an auditor to a factory. And sending an auditor to a factory isn't going to solve these issues very well. An auditor can't see this. And an auditor doesn't often have a chance to talk to employees in an unfettered and honest way. You find things you can do, like you can go to the factory and ask people to give you bring their passports in and show them to you, so to see whether they have access to their passports. But that would not be a normal thing you would do in a typical factory audit, where when you think about the issues in Bangladesh, you're looking for fire extinguishers and locked fire doors, and you're trying to check the books to be sure that people are simply being paid for the hours they work. When you start getting into agricultural supply chains, of course, that gets even more difficulty. And there isn't that much commonality between some of these supply chains, so all of this makes it harder. And it is an emotional issue, which is why I think I'm in some ways the accidental panelist, because just being associated with a word, if you're managing the corporate PR department somewhere, it's not a good place. And therefore, it becomes, I think, in the partnerships, and Nina and Dan, just they've taught companies how to do this, but you have to have partners who are really going to help you. And the partners have a challenge of understanding, when it's right to kind of go slow, and when it's right to say you're not doing enough. But I'll stop there too, because I know we'll be able to come back and talk about some of the ways to go forward. So, but just to say, none of this sort of description that I've described in any way was I meant to say that an excuse for not doing all this, just why it takes so much work on the part of so many dedicated people, and why it takes so much persuasion inside to get people to embark on these programs that could truly make a difference.
Well, I'm going to open it up in a minute, but let me ask you, Leslie, to comment on something, and maybe the other panelists too. Obviously, changing the demand and possibly the supply goes to the heart of some of this, but do we need governments, and do we need advocacy on governments to set better laws and or better enforcement? So Leslie, you come out of at least some government advocacy thinking. Maybe you want to address it first, but I'd love to hear the other panelists, and then I'd like to turn to those of you in the room.
Well, for sure, yes, but for sure not enough.
Yeah.
Because I think this is clearly one of these issues where you can't wait for that, and where these guys will have to answer. It's unlikely the laws will get you, even when you're successful, all the way to the places you need to be in all the countries you need to be in. So I think there's clearly a role for the visual spotlight on this. While no one wants to be there, whether it does help create prioritizations when you know that it's an issue that people are looking at. So there's a role for I think for the spotlight as well. But I think ultimately this becomes an issue where to get the scale that we need, we have to have more voluntary interaction from companies who choose to do this, not because they kind of have to, even though they should and they have to, but because they've decided for a variety of reasons to invest their time and capital in making this work. But I was just delaying so that you guys could
Dan,
think.
and then Nina, and then Leif.
Slavery is not legal, as far as I know, anywhere in the world, maybe with a few exceptions, right? So when we think about the legal question,
right,
we're not thinking about the laws like, is this okay or not? It's not okay. No company in the world has a code of conduct, an ethical approach, that internally allows it to have slaves in its supply chain, right? So again, the legal framework is actually, in some ways, fully fledged. What doesn't exist is the operational framework. And we see some very interesting interventions of the California Transparency Act, the proposed UK Transparency Act, or Supply Chains Anti-Slavery Bill, And now, very importantly, something we're working on an awful lot, implementation of President Obama's 2012 executive order about procurement, and trafficking in federal procurement, right? So that's not a legal change. What it is rather saying we're going to add in some new components to require anyone willing to sell in this marketplace, the largest buyer of goods and services in the world, the U.S. government, such that they have to demonstrate new effort. I think that sort of quasi-regulatory, operationally focused intervention is obviously incredibly useful, and it will still require companies, as Leslie says, to decide that they're going to take this on, for whatever reason, either because they're in the spotlight or because they do it voluntarily, ethically, or because it's the only way they can access the market.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up and say that I don't think making this voluntary for companies is going to get us there at all. We have an easy off-the-shelf solution for companies, and many sell the product area that we work on, and we have very few multinationals that have really gotten behind what we do. Macy's is one of them in the US. We've been in long conversations. Macy's took 10 years. There are many companies who shall remain nameless because we're in very critical discussions with them, but let me just say that they need more motivation to not say, oh, my producer in this Indian village gives money to a school. Because that right now is seen as a voluntary solution, and they just aren't getting it. It's not okay to exploit people and then put a few dollars into a school, which, by the way, has their name on the signboard. And it's going to take stronger legislation, and Dan highlighted some efforts that are going on, and those things are going to help. We're talking a lot about wanting to see more incentives for companies to tackle these issues in a particular way. For example, wouldn't it be great if companies who demonstrate that at all levels of the supply chain are not using child labor or slave labor get tariff breaks or those kinds of things? There are many small and medium-sized producers in Nepal, for example, that are taking the measures that they should be taking, and they're often the ones losing and swallowing the extra money involved to do that, and they should be rewarded by their government, by our government. So those are the kinds of things we'd like to start seeing too.
LEIF, and then I'm going to turn to the audience. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say that, I think I'm infinitely astonished and curious, as a journalist, as to why this is still a problem. And my fellow panelists have illuminated some of the issues. I think, that's what I've seen in telling these stories. Precisely what Leslie was mentioning, just associating your company or your brand with slavery, even if you are doing everything right and you're leading the issue in your respective industry, they still don't want to talk about it. Even when I call up and I say, I'll just say Delta Airlines, for example, they're doing a lot of work on trying to crack down child sex tourism. And I'm like, well, that's an issue. We're telling a story about it. Let's have you on and you can talk about, what needs to happen in the industry. Are you kidding? No way. That would be the last thing that they would want to do. And that was something that I really didn't understand for a long time. And part of my job as a journalist is to get to the truth, get to the answers, get to an understanding of why these things are taking place. And that's why we look for people like Nina and Dan, because they have been engaged in this issue for so long, and they really understand the complexities. And we can't always translate that, into a 3-minute short story. But I think by consistently keeping it in the public sphere and talking about it and showing the pictures of these people who are working in brick kilns or 20 hours in a factory, I think that helps sensitize the broader society to the issue. And I think it gives courage. The example of Nestle, and we should say the executive's name is the EVP of supply chains, Jose Lopez, you know, he's nearing retirement. He's looking at not necessarily his legacy, but his long span of his career, and he wants to do something. And I think we need more bold leadership in these corporations to actually do what they know is right. I think everybody knows that it's right. It's just hard. But so what? It's, I mean, the things that are taking place. I mean, as a journalist, it's great because I have an endless, you know, an endless list of stories to choose from. I thought I was going to have a hard time trying to get at slavery, but I have, you know, 500 stories on the docket at any time that I can pick a country, I can pick an industry, and just go tell those stories. But that's not what I want to see happen. I want to see a time where every company is engaged, and it's really, really hard to find people in any country that are, you know, being exploited this way. So
great. Yeah. So let me turn it to the audience, and I'll start right there, and then come over here. So second row.
So I'm just wondering.
I think you need to use the mic. Thank you. And please, can you say your name too?
My name is Janine Firpo. I work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but in a completely different area. My question is, if part of the problem is that it's so difficult to tell where this is actually happening, and these people feel so disempowered, is there anyone who's thinking about using social networks and social media to create kind of a global SOS so that people who are in these situations can make themselves heard, and you could GIS map it and begin to see where there's maybe real areas that you could go in and target?
Good question. I might take several questions so that the panel can answer a couple together. So maybe right here in front of you, and then I'll move in this direction.
Okay.
So
Suzanne
just make
Beagle.
them quick if you can.
Okay, yes. Suzanne Beagle. I'm an impact investor in Women and Girls. And Labor Voices is the only social enterprise, for-profit social enterprise that I know that's working on that issue. So they have mobile technology to uncover issues in factories. And I'm curious, given that we're at Skoll, if people know about other for-profit social enterprises that are directly working on this issue. But if you don't know about Labor Voices, you should know about them.
Good. Then you, and then we'll move it over here.
Matthias Terhagen. I'm managing a small foundation in Singapore, a private one. Thank you very much for continuing to put a spotlight on this sort of equally monstrous as well as hidden issue. A quick question, because all of this has been sort of about the relation between slavery and supply chains and corporates ending up somewhere in the West. To start with, is there a definition of slavery? So sort of, you know, if I'm at 5% of the average per capita GDP, is that slavery? And that the reason why I'm asking that is that easily brings me into that area of, for example, domestic helpers in some of the Gulf states. So we've talked a lot about sort of corporate supply chain related slavery. Is that the biggest issue? Or what about, you know, anywhere from, I don't know, child soldiers to domestic helpers to sex trade and so on? And then that leads me into my last question, and I'll pass on. This is a lot about changing the perception around the awareness and the perception and discussion around slavery here, but how much is the issue that this all happens in societies which are fairly tolerant towards these practices in their own neighborhood, and how much of because the Mexican knows and the Chinese knows, and they all know what's happening in their neighborhoods. So how much work needs to be done to change cultures there, actually? Sorry, I'll leave it at
Thanks, Matthias. I'm going to keep a couple more questions going because I think this is helpful just to kind of get things. So I think we had a couple in this row, and then we'll go to the next row.
Hi, I'm Yasmin Woolji. I'm a solicitor and the head of pro bono at Hogan Lovells. One of the things that I've been looking at is legal activism. And I was one of the first people to get compensation awards for victims of trafficking and forced prostitution using state provision for compensation for violent crime. And now we can use it in the UK and across Europe. And we've started to use it in Hong Kong. So there are ways of holding businesses to account, and also individuals when you're talking about domestic workers. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot more activism that could be done, which might help concentrate minds a bit.
Great. So let me do the lady in red, and then We'll take a quick break, and then I see 3 more.
Hi, my name is Leslie Johnston. I'm with CNA Foundation, and it's actually a question for the other Leslie. I agree it's really hard to get these changes in big corporations. I'm tied to a very large corporation, and it's like steering a ship. I would love to hear from your experience, best practices in how a philanthropic entity can help catalyze change, and change within, and then change outside as well.
Good. So does everybody feel there's 1 or 2 there you want to respond to? We'll do those quickly and then keep it going, since it's great to have the response. So who wants to go first?
I'll just
Quickly.
jump in with Matthias's question, because that's exactly what we were concerned with, is that there's various definitions of slavery, and you can look at many different forms. And for us, it was we had to be very careful in terms of what issues we decided to focus on and where we decided to draw the line, because slavery isn't necessarily a black or white issue. It's a continuum. There's various levels of exploitation. So in terms of definition, how we define slavery is when one person controls another person, exploits them economically or otherwise through the use of violence or the threat of violence, and that person cannot walk away. And I think the last part is the most important part. They're in a situation where they're fearing for their safety or the safety of their family, or they're actually physically constrained and prevented from leaving. That's when it rises to the level of slavery. Now, when you talk about bad jobs, I think a lot of people think they have a terrible job and maybe they can't leave because of financial constraints. But when we're talking about physically being constrained, that's how we define slavery.
That's helpful. Leslie, you want to? Or the passport's taken away.
Yeah, that's another means of controlling.
Enforced. So that's the control issue. Yeah, Leslie, you want
That's
to
a tough. It took me years, and I still haven't figured out the answer to your question. But just a few thoughts. I think I had the luxury of managing a significant foundation as well. And I just want to put in a word for the person who used to run that, Sylvia Burwell, who many people here know today, is getting nominated to be the HHS Cabinet Secretary in the United States. So there's a social entrepreneur who's burrowed in pretty deep. So anyway, just got to say that she's great. But I think running a foundation in a big corporation is often far too separated from the business, and that you're giving money, being thoughtful about it every day. Maybe it's all for a good cause, but it's over here. So I think one of the steps, if you're sitting in the foundation, is to really find issues that the business can work on, your supply chain, all the things that you do as a business, and use your seat as the head of philanthropy to help devise places where the business can make a difference through its own practices, and then use the philanthropy to support that, or to identify an issue, whether it's an issue like modern slavery, and see how you can put together a partnership where your money helps to pay for sort of a big part of something that needs to happen, but you've put that sort of partnership all the way through the scale. Because I think that there's a great opportunity for corporate foundations to play a larger role inside. And also, I'll speak again from my own experience. We had a significant foundation, but and every grant was well thought through, and we did what I said. We would first do something with the business and support it, but we didn't support social entrepreneurs per se. We didn't make social investments per se. So to also take a look at what might be a traditional spending pattern and try and be innovative within your own spending pattern, I think then opens up a lot of opportunities for further innovation. I'll stop.
Dan?
A couple of thoughts. The definition question, first of all, the phrase in one of the UN protocols is menace of penalty or pain. So, it's not a matter of only violence. The question of debt and the inability to leave is a key factor. And essentially the definition of slavery is that a number of these different factors, passport withholding, threats, debt, interact. So it's not a wage level, it's not just bad working conditions. It's something more technical, and it's essentially when one person exerts control over another. The question related sort of technology, we actually do have a proposal in to a funder that I should hear about any day to do something we're calling Yelp for migrant workers, right? So can we create a positive feedback loop whereby returned workers or in-country workers begin to upload information, text it up, it gets somehow back to workers who are pre-migrant, working through community organizations and sending communities Labor Voices is a good organization. Labor Link, we work with someone called Souktel, which is based in Palestine. So there's a variety of people sort of looking at this. We're launching in the United States a hotline for U.S. agriculture workers with Polaris Project, which is the U.S. National Anti-Trafficking Hotline with whom we collaborate. There's a bunch going on. The limiting factor is the company's got to want to use it. They got to make it. They got to get access to their workers for it. So Cole at Labor Voice has been working on this for a while. We've been working on this for a while. So is Labor Link. It's the limiting factor right now is not the innovation and it's not the good ideas. It's the multinationals that are willing to work and drive this through their supply chains.
Interesting.
So for principle, does the average slave even dare to use something like that? They're putting their own situation in. I mean,
it's so contextual, but there shouldn't be any reason why a Taiwanese garment worker or an electronics worker like the ones we've met, there is already a Taiwan hotline. There shouldn't be any reason why they wouldn't be able to use it. U.S. agricultural workers shouldn't be any reason why they wouldn't be able to use it. If you're talking about people on a fishing boat, if you're talking about the kids that Nina works with and rescues, clearly not. That's a different category. I mean, not to speak for you, but to speak for you.
Thank you.
So speak for you.
Well, I wanted to move the conversation into the communities because there was a question asked about that, and there has to be a lot more work done in worker communities. I can give you some examples of some things we're doing on that front as well. In India, carpets and other textiles, I mean, again, we're working in the carpet industry. It's indicative of the entire informal labor sector. And India is the place where half of all slavery in the world exists. It's critical we tackle it there. And there are swaths of that country, despite the development in India, and that are just off the grid. And these are the people making clothing and textiles that are coming, that we're buying here in Europe and in North America. Some of the communities that we work in eastern Uttar Pradesh state are really completely removed from all access to government services. And we have an initiative that we're rolling out with other very grassroots NGOs, and there are others doing this in other parts of India. We call ours child-friendly villages, but really it's tackling all forms of slavery in that we have community activists who go in, who convene meetings, are educating people about their rights. They don't even know what their rights are. They don't even know that they're being enslaved. They don't know that their child has a right to an education. So it's a process of, it's an organizing process, a documentation process. The community itself maps the community, maps the households, maps, you know, which children are in school. It's very comprehensive. The data is collected and tracked. Then the village is involved in getting a school in place. Kids are enrolled in school, and long term, that data is used to advocate to the government of India, which has a very strong Right to Education Act, which says that every child should have access, will have legally a right to a primary school within 1 kilometer walking distance. Very, very few of the villages where we operate in India, in a particular part of India where we work, have schools in place. And so we're using that data to raise awareness, and there are schools that are starting to come in as a result of this. And this is just one aspect of it, but there are a lot of organizing efforts like that, and on top of it, educating workers about their rights, because they are so isolated and so it's hard to even imagine if you go into Macy's, into the rug department, and see where they're sold, and then juxtapose that against the places where they're made. They're just really isolated and unorganized. So
I got 2 questions on the next row, if you can get the mic to there, and right there, right up to your right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andréane Grimard from Solidaridad. We work to make 13 supply chains sustainable socially, economically, and environmentally. My question is about legislation. The timber supply chain has this very interesting piece of legislation called the Lacey Act, which puts the onus on the importer into the US to make sure that the imported wood and raw material has been extracted legally according to the laws of the country of origin. Is there any potential for this type of legislation that addresses labor, legal labor?
Good question. And then next to you, and then two over here.
Hi, my name is Josh Carlin. I work with Healthcare Without Harm. And I guess, I've been thinking about the anti-sweatshop movement in the 1990s and how in the United States and Europe, student organizing and NGOs sort of really publicly shamed companies, and it created the space for groups like Verite and others. I'm not sure if Verite itself, but other groups like Verite to come in and actually work with those companies, and it put the pressure on those companies to move more quickly to transform some of their practices and to address the issues with their subcontractors. I'm wondering if you guys can give a couple of examples of how that's happened around slavery more recently, or if not, why isn't it happening more broadly around this issue?
Great question. And two right here.
Hi, I'm Hayley from Bioregional. I've been working with companies on their environmental and social responsibility programs, and one of the problems I've been having is getting the resource into the teams that really need to be looking at social compliance and the issues that you're discussing. And where it has been successful is where we've managed to identify a risk, and as soon as you can demonstrate that a risk is there within their supply chains, they do something about it and they put everything into that. In terms of identifying other risks, back to the lady's point over there, there is information available. There's a lot of risk analytics that have been done on countries, but it all to me seems proprietary. It's through companies like Maplecroft who seem to own this information, and I'm just wondering, in your experience, how do we get hold of better, good information quickly and ideally freely? Does that exist? Really be interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Thank you. And next to you.
Hi, I'm Alicia. I'm with the Thomson Reuters Foundation, which enjoys a relatively independent situation as a corporate foundation, but was in a CSR role for many years at a bank in my previous life, and certainly can agree with everything Leslie said about what the challenges are if you sit in a CSR or sustainability role to try to get people to see that. The only time we could ever make any action on something that wasn't consumer driven, that was going to cost a lot of money, that would involve hiring more staff, was if we had someone in the C-suite that was backing us. So particularly for those of you guys that are working with multinationals, is that the one, not to kind of just reduce what is a very complex problem, but do you think that is a significant driver if you have a C-suite level executive that is really pushing this forward and saying, yes, I'll put the budget behind it, yes, I'll put the resource behind it, we're going to commit to this even if we don't see a short-term business objective?
So I'm going to make this a final question because we have just about 5 to 6 minutes left, so everybody can have a quick wrap up. And I see other hands, so I want to make sure you have time to come up and talk to the panelists. So we'll try to stay on time so that you can have that time as well. So Nina, you want to get us started?
Yeah.
Sorry. Were you not ready? Did somebody else want to start?
No, I'm fine. They're just, I can barely remember all the questions. But I mean, in answer to your last question, it absolutely makes a difference when the company at the highest level is committed to the issue. But even when they are, it takes time. So there's a new coalition bubbling up, GBCAT, Global Business Coalition Against Trafficking, that's come together, and it's yet to be seen how that's going to make a difference. But there is some corporate leadership coming together to dialogue, share best practices, but we really want to see some action coming out of that pretty fast. So we'll see where that heads. But yes, that has to happen. And I think, maybe I would just make a comment, because there were a lot of questions, and I don't remember all of them. But to get back to this question of pressure, I think there are a few points I want to make. One is this is a relatively new movement, and those of us that have some solutions on the table to share, we haven't been at it that long. And one of the things that Dan and I have been talking about, and we need to do as a movement, is just now are we beginning to coalesce as a movement in the way that, say, others have in global health, and we need to be doing more of that. And we talk a lot about starting to define ourselves, what is an acceptable response from a company and what is not? Because there are too many unacceptable responses. So even if the CEO is saying, I want you to deal with this, it's not being handled properly. And LEIF highlighted the cocoa issue. There's an example, right? So the world suddenly knew about slavery and cocoa supply chain. So what happened? A secret protocol was negotiated by some US senators with the companies behind the scenes. The protocol was announced, and 10 years later, nothing changed. And in that protocol, it talked about third-party independent supply chain monitoring. That never happened. So I think we as a movement need to strengthen ourselves to mobilize at all levels, to get consumers moving, to get some legislation in place, and to make sure that best practice solutions are the ones that are being deployed, and anything else is just not acceptable. We aren't there yet, but that's where this movement is now moving towards. So,
great, good point. Dan?
I also will take the liberty of melding a number of distinct questions into one answer that may have nothing to do with the question.
As you should.
Is that what you're saying?
As I should. No. Also, by the way, fully endorse what Nina says, and let me just point out, she has she at GoodWeave operates and owns the only real slave-free certification that is available to consumers. It's really important to know, and it's narrow, and it's hard to maintain, and it's costly to do. It's not costly to the companies that are part of it, but when we think about how can we get consumers involved, let's remember that there is a model, and it's a challenging one. I say there's a proud GoodWeave board member. I think we're on the verge, I will say optimistically, we're on the verge of many more companies getting involved from the C-suite on down, and I think this because slavery is not one of those other labor issues that is debatable. Companies and people in the labor rights movement discuss all the time unionization, collective bargaining, the right to or the respect of or the distance from, right? People discuss whether a wage is a good wage, a living wage, a bad wage, a minimum wage. There's lots of debate, some of it healthy, some of it not particularly healthy, but on slavery there's no one debating that slavery is a good thing. There's no one frankly on a multinational level benefiting from it financially at the multinational. No multinational business plan is organized around exploiting people at that level. It's being siphoned off, and it's a risk to everybody involved. So I feel like there's potential progress in the short term. One of the things that will help that progress is, I don't know if the Lacey Act can be extended, but the United States Department of Labor every year publishes a list of goods that are produced with child and forced labor, and there's lots on it. And to the extent that manufactured products get on it, or even some clear agricultural commodities get on it, companies pay attention. It leaves us then with the question that Nina raised, which is how do we know that what they're doing is adequate, much less really good, as opposed to just some sort of lip service PR response, and that's our responsibility, you're right. But that tightening that and beginning to use those levers has some potential.
I'm going to turn to LEIF next and put the accidental guy last.
Well, I'll take a stab at answering the questions specifically. I think the Lacey Act is very interesting, and it's something that we haven't covered on the Freedom Project. So that would be a potential story, and I think I'll go back home and look at that. In terms of creating a broad-based grassroots social movement against this issue, I think the topic is easy, right? And I think it's something people can rally around, like the sweatshops. The difference is the sweatshops you could clearly see. Now within, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in these factories, some people might be in a state of slavery, other people might just have a crappy job. And it's all about how they came to that job and the debts that they incurred in the process, and whether or not they can leave. Now, I mean, it also varies factory to factory, and company to company. And my experience with the corporations, and I mentioned Jose Lopez from Nestle, that's the only reason. He saw the story, he saw how we were approaching the issue, and he decided to do something, and he didn't, and that's how that all came about. So it really is about, from where I sit, and I'm not engaged in any discussions, high-level discussions with these corporations, but from where I sit, it has to be the companies taking ownership of the problem, addressing it, and trying to do something to change it.
Thanks.
Just one thought, and it relates to the conversation folks raised about risk. And in my experience in trying to get a big company to do big things, risk, I think, is a bad way to look at the lens. Because when you look at risk, you by definition do very few things. And when you look at opportunity, all of a sudden you can do a lot. So I urge people not to allow a risk-based lens for looking at these things. And I think one of the biggest kind of places where I felt the point is, as you said, when somebody agrees to the seal, is when I would propose something that we should do, source $20 billion from women, and somebody would say, well, why do I have to do that? And I'd say, well, that's not the question. The question is, why shouldn't we do that? We can. I mean, tell me why we shouldn't do this. And when you flip that, all of a sudden the world becomes a much bigger cookie jar. And so I think it's just very important. We need the lawyers, and we need all of that, and risk drives, but risk management will not take us, kind of as an overall social movement across areas where we need to go. And if you hold companies just to risk minimization, you'll sell them short, and we'll sell our values and our aspirations short.
Great, thank you. Well, before I ask you to join me in thanking this superb panel, I want to give you a quote to send you out of the room. So I think I said to another panel yesterday, next year is the 70th anniversary of the UN, so I've been researching Eleanor Roosevelt. Yes. So, some of you know her most famous quote that you never know how a woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she is until you see her in hot water. So that's a great quote, but here's one I thought was perfect for today. I know that we will be the sufferers if we let great wrongs occur without exerting ourselves to correct them. So I think we heard some good reasons to do that today, and I just want to thank everybody on this panel. Thank you.